G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and importantly a fantastic start to your week. Now I did lie to you, I said that I wouldn't have time to do a video today. Now I got up early and I have found some time, but I do need to say I am not cherry picking on purpose. I've just taken the information of which I collected some last night, some very early this morning. So if I do miss a lot, it will be in an update in the coming days. I apologise, I'm trying to make it quick to get to my oncology appointment. Pretty good excuse. But today, of course, we have a lot to go. We need to look at the impact of what, of course, has occurred in Syria. We will always look at the maps, and the deep state literally just updated, so you and me, we're virgin eyes looking on this map. I haven't really had much of a squiz. And then I want to look at a bombshell that Trump dropped and Zelensky's response to that. Of course, Zelenskyy, Trump and Macron were in France over the past couple of days, and there has been some discussions. And I want to look at what Trump has said about losses, about ending the war, about negotiations, and then what Zelenskyy has said back to that. And me being a YouTuber, I just want to give my 2 cents on that. Now, let me know if you like the new format, because typically I do all my writing on my slides, on my teleprompter, and then go from there. But what I've been doing is creating slides and writing on them so you can see my spelling errors, but also so you can pause, you can read that slide, and you could grab that slide as well if you would like to. Let me know if you like that or not. Now, before we get into the maps first, I want to talk about Syria and some common misconceptions and some other bits and pieces from some trusted friends of mine, analysts, but silent analysts who are far better than us who bloody do this for a living on YouTube. So this is what I was sent across. I don't get the joy pro-Ukrainians are having from the fall of Assad's regime. How can you ignore the fact that military forces, which weren't insignificant, will now be directed to Ukraine? And I actually spoke about this in an interview. I've got to go back through the interview if I want to listen to specifically what was said, but it was back in 2022. And we spoke about Russia's invasion into Ukraine, but we also said that the Russian ability to bring in a lot of assets is limited due to their commitments around the world. And this is one thing which many large countries who want to have power in different corners of the globe have problems with. They've got so much shit in so many areas. They've got so many fingers in so many pies in one area. How much force can you actually push? And that this can have an effect on that. Now, how significant is the force that is coming out of Syria? It's not going to have, I don't think we'll notice a huge change in just the tactical military nature in Ukraine, but it isn't nothing either. Now, too many people are focusing maybe strategically, maybe not tactically on this. Yes, the fall of Syria, it diminishes Russia's power in the Mediterranean. This is fantastic for Turkey, it's great for NATO, and it's fantastic for Israel. Now, I say Turkey and NATO there because there is a separation in their operations in Syria. My opinion is you cannot separate that. Like a cop in or out of uniform, you are a cop 24 hours a day unless you retire. You represent that. So I don't think they should be connected, but I have for the sake of it. So it is fantastic for that. But Ukraine's not part of that, nor does Ukraine border the Mediterranean. They border the Black Sea, Sea of Azov, and what it does then is it frees up assets, but more importantly, not the assets, not the planes or the Navy or whatever. It frees up cash, and that is one thing we know which keeps, of course, the war machine grinding. And this could go forward into occupied territories to further the military invasion into Ukraine. So I get it on a strategic level, diminishing Russia's power maybe in a sector of the world, but in that local sector, well, if America was at a war on its border, the fall of Afghanistan would have actually helped to draw those forces and soldiers out, maybe not all the equipment left behind. But this is something I want to talk about further from another colleague of mine. You made an excellent point about the Russian port in Syria. With the Excuse me, with the loss of this port, I might sound like RFK for a second, with the loss of this port, they lose their redundancy option to immediately influence the Mediterranean. Turkey now has them geopolitically by the balls and can squeeze the Bosphorus Strait. The Red Sea port is fine until Turkey locks them out of the Gulf of Aden with their fleet based out of Somalia. So we've talked about Red Sea ports in areas, but we do know Turkey has a fleet in Somalia. So getting through the Suez is difficult as Turkey can do something about that choke point. Now, what we have said is there is a difference between what is naval navigation legally and how major powers can exert their power on those areas, particularly the Bosphorus and Turkey. Should these Russian Navy ships completely by the book be able to cross through the Bosphorus? Yes. What we said yesterday is Turkey may argue, they may say, due to these ships being away from the home port of the Black Sea Fleet, from Sevastopol, for X amount of time, they are therefore not part of that. They're not crossing through. So they can make it very, very difficult. So we talked about other ways, maybe down into other ports, other areas in this sector of the world. Turkey can do something about that choke point. So let's have a look. So of course, this is the Gulf of Aden and this is the Red Sea. And we talked about Russia signing a deal with Sudan about having their fleet or some ships move to a port here. Of course, this is where Syria is. This is Turkey. So this is the Bosphorus, which Turkey control. And although there should be freedom of navigation for home port ships in here, they don't also need to give it. But down here, Somalia, Gulf of Aden, this can cause problems for navigation for Russian ships. And we see this laying the groundwork. Of course, this was a war well over a decade long. There was a lot of groundwork laid. And we just have a quick Google of Turkey, Somalia Navy. Turkey Parliament approves 2-year naval deployment in July of 2024. So this, of course, exerts power in Somalia, Gulf of Aden, the Arabian Sea, and can cause a lot of issues for navigation here. There's a lot of players in this. This is why we say again and again that Syria is the absolute basis of everyone wanting to conduct some level of proxy and influence further. Turkey is throwing its weight around. Let's see if Trump blunts their bullshit. So again, we will wait and see what exactly occurs here. But I showed you one map already. Let's have a look at the actual maps and see what is changed. So here is Ukraine, the centre, the capital of Kyiv. Red areas occupied since 22, purple since 14. The red check indicating ground that Russia has made over the past 24 hours. The blue within Ukraine's borders, ground that Ukraine has made back in the past 2 weeks. But I believe we'll be looking at the red check today as I can't see any blue. And I did have a read of what Deep State has said. And I don't believe there's any changes up in Kursk either. So let's have a look at the maps. Of course, we have the Syriac maps to have a comparison. So we have Pokrovsk, Shevchenko, and as you can see, widening this area into Shevchenko, this Novi Trud as well. Of course, expanding that control towards Pokrovsk. I think we will see Russia from here push probably directly to the east and try and level out this towards Lesivkia to have more control towards Pokrovsk. Is that, if that hasn't already occurred, more so like what Syriac is showing on this map here. Although Syriac is showing less control around Novi Trud than Deep State is showing. So I'll go with the Deep State on this one, but they are showing more control out to the west of Zvote as well, and more control towards this Dashenki too. Now, Russian army re-entered these and outskirts of Dashenki. Also, advances were made north of Pushkeni. So we will see more and more pushing towards then Pokrovsk on this front, as we see more pushing towards Velika Novosilka yesterday. Also, we will talk about this. Now, we just moved down. We have a little bit more red in the center of Kurakhove, and we have a little bit more red around Trudov as well, with this area mostly coming under Russian occupation at this point in time. But I actually believe from my read before, this is all the updates we have on this map. So let's move through then the Syriac map updates, as he is very, very reliable. So let's have a look. So we did see yesterday this area to above Starmorsky to the west of Velikonovsilka come under control by the Russian forces. Situation in Velikonovsilka is up front. Russian army made a series of advances east of Rivnepil and reached the western outskirts of Makarivka, Soyevzy. So you can see where this has moved up. And look, I'm not going to nitpick exactly where this is, but it is in very similar areas of where this has moved forward. This is showing far more control, maybe, than Deep State. But what we get out of this, what we can pull, is both maps are showing there was advancement here. So we can assume there was advancement here. How much? We don't know. I believe yesterday the Deep State showed 1,600 meters, so right on 1 mile, which is a long way to advance in 24 hours. Like I always say, if this was the other way, people would be wetting their pants. You have to take things one way and the other to do proper analysis. Again, the truth does not care for your emotion. Let's have a look at Kursk. No changes in here, but we can see these Telecons, which are sitting in here, even one outside of the grey area. Russian army took control over one of the Telecons and captured most of the district of Kimkolonka. I'm not going to try and, well, I did try and pronounce it, but here we go. So taking over this area in here, pushing further into the centre of Kursk. Just wait until other maps are displaying this. Also, I think Syriac may give another update today, and I apologise, but I will very likely miss it. We'll push north of here, and then we come, of course, into what I refer to as the Pishani front, then squeezing Ukraine against the Oskil, particularly in this pocket that has formed. We have Lozova, Veshnevy, areas of which I'm sure you are familiar with. Now we have another update in here. We just need to zoom in one. We have Veshnevy and this Zelenskyy High. Russian army have made new advances northeast of Zelenskyy High, reaching the locality on this axis. So if we look where this funny shaped paddock is, this is this Lego brick looking paddock right here. That he's saying that Russia has advanced in this area here. I keep hitting the wrong button. And let's say he's saying there's about, close enough, about a 4.48 kilometre advancement in this area, according to Syriac. This is, of course, shown as grey zone on this map. Let me just step back. This always glitches for me. So the grey zone's still being shown there. So again, grain of salt till we show geolocations and or further other maps displaying similar information. Kursk, we see some changes in here. Kononevsky district, Ukrainian army re-entered the locality of Pokrovsk and recaptured half of it. So where we're talking about is up around this Pokrovsk here. Of course, this is Kononovo, where Ukraine was at some point, really knocking on the doors of Kononovo. Some say 10 kilometers from where it is now, 12 kilometers, and there is a re-entry of positions in here shown by this zoom in on the map. But then further, we need to have a look at the Suja district. Russian army recaptured completely the locality of Pokrovsk and across the river Sel, reaching the outskirts of Guevo. So we can see, I'll show you in a second. So we want to be looking for Ulinok, Pokrovsk. It can be hard on this map because the red is shown as all of Russian territory. It can be a bit of a mind fuck to get your mind around where this is actually looking, but they're pushing down here then along the bottom of the border. So we can see this is this Guevo, that's how I'm pronouncing it in here. So reaching the outskirts right in here, this is what Syriac is at least claiming, and cross the river Siel in there. So if this is taken as true, let's say they're right on the outskirts. Let's go from here about 6 kilometers. If we go from here, about 3.36 kilometers. So that is a major advancement. Anyway, what we should say for that first one is this Pokrovsk, I can't pronounce any of this, but I'm Australian, don't blame me. Very uncultured. That this is has always been under Ukrainian control. So this map is showing the same. That's why it may not show the backwards and forwards. And this is something I have found with Deep State many times, is it can't show sometimes a Ukrainian advance because it never showed the Russian advancement in that area that is moving forwards and backwards. Now, I mentioned in the very beginning that Trump did lay down a bit of a bombshell. So let's talk about what he has said, and we get onto my bloody crappy slides. It's like the wish.com variant of Perun. Donald Trump on that truth.com, I don't use it, I don't know if anyone uses it, but he says, Assad is gone. He fled his country. His protector, Russia, led by Vladimir Putin, was not interested in protecting him any longer. There was no reason for Russia to be there in the first place. So this is one thing we have spoken about. Trump is saying Russia did not need to be there in the first place. He said yesterday, I believe, but it did embarrass Obama a lot. They lost all interest in Syria because of Ukraine, where close to 600,000 Russian soldiers lay wounded or dead. Now say it with me. All figures until well after the war we are going to take with a grain of salt. But this is very interesting in here, because I don't know if Trump has been back-briefed on numbers or not, okay? But the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense puts liquidated. Now, if I read liquidated, that does not mean injured, that means dead. And many people are taking that as KIA, liquidated. They put that at over 750,000. So you're talking over 2 million then would be wounded or missing in action as a total. And this is what I meant yesterday, that your calculation and analysis from point A may be correct, but those initial numbers you plug in, if they are bullshit, you will carry the mistake. You will come to the right answer for what you've plugged in, but you've plugged in the wrong numbers at the beginning. And what I have said is, this is why I don't make these grand claims of Russia will run out of tanks on this date, they'll run out of men on this date, their economy will collapse on this date, like many people, many media, even politicians do, because those numbers you cannot get reliability on. This is why people talk about kilometre squares, because that is actually something measurable and provable. So I believe many carrying that mistake through. Let's continue. In a war that should never have started and could go on forever, Russia and Iran are in a weakened state right now. One, because Ukraine and a bad economy. Like we said, Iran was the one who absolutely lost out in Syria more so than anyone else. And Israel, they have moved into Syria with tanks as a buffer. So I will say, watch this space. If anyone else was to do that, there would be a lot of uproar. We'll see what Turkey does as well. The situation in Syria is not over. I believe the next decade we will see complete swaps of power again. I don't even know who. There's a massive power vacuum at the moment in Syria, and many people wanting to grab, of course, onto this. Likewise, Zelenskyy in Ukraine would like to make a deal and stop the madness. So what has come out of the conversation is, behind closed doors, Zelenskyy saying we would like to make a deal. They have ridiculously lost 400,000 soldiers and many more civilians. So again, with any numbers, grain of salt, but he says they have lost 400,000. Does lost mean KIA or KIA including wounded in action? We'll talk about this more. There should be an immediate ceasefire and negotiations should begin. So this is part of Trump's vow to end the war. Number one, Trump ran into the election on this, ending this war. But he has spoken about these weakened states and funding an attritional war that is massively expensive and uses a massive amount of hardware, particularly air defense and artillery. This can put America in a weakened position globally, because America, more so than any other country in the world combined, has more fingers in more pies in sectors around the world, both declared and non-declared areas. Now, we speak about then massive expenses, reduced hardware, and we can talk economic pressures around the world, de-dollarization, and we can talk about air defense shortage in case of other things picking up. Particularly, we need to look at China and the power of BRICS. Too many lives are there should be an immediate ceasefire and negotiations should begin. Too many lives are being needlessly wasted, too many families destroyed, and if it keeps going, it can turn into something much bigger and far worse. So right here he's talking militarily, the threat of expanding across more borders, and of course bringing in nuclear weapons. Politically though, he's hinting, I believe, at division within Western states and within the IR, the international relations community, with developing states. That although we see this war, we see where people may support militarily, this could expand. Politically, given where alliances are, could we see further division between states? What I will say is nothing has more division than the US support of Israel if we look at the UN and who is siding where on votes against that. So the division there in the international relations community is massive as well. I think that is something carrying into the future as other powers gain more and more power, developing these second world countries, developing, whatever you want to call it. I think that will actually have a great influence in the coming, maybe not decade, but maybe century. We will, of course, see. And if it keeps going, it can turn into something much bigger and far worse. I know Vladimir well. This is his time to act. China can help. The world is waiting. So, what people often forget is that Putin also has to come to the negotiating table. You've got two ways to bring someone to a negotiating table: carrot and stick. Now, the stick at the moment is Ukraine, and the stick at the moment isn't in a position of power like some would like to say. So it is a carrot for that negotiation, which is going to make a lot of people very, very unhappy if the war was to end at this point in time. What would that deal actually look like? And we hear again and again, Ukraine must negotiate from a position of power. Now, I agree with this statement, but if you're making this statement that they must negotiate from a position of power, well, who is then in the position of power right now? Now, is that position of power going to change within the next 30 days? And then there's a negotiation. That is the problem here in this matrix that we're putting together of what it's going to look like at the table. China can help. In my opinion, the real peace plan that had legs for the time, so for the epoch at the point in the war, as Russia was not particularly on the offensive when this came out, was China's willingness to work with Brazil and the international community on their, I don't know if they call it the 6-point peace plan, but I'm going to. It's like the 6-point like end of war plan. At that epoch, that was the plan at the time that could have actually ended, because where Russia's demands were, where Ukraine's demands were so far apart, but China has so much influence, especially on Russia, and then America's influence, maybe that at the time. And it seemed like they were taking in some parts of territorial integrity, other parts of non-aggression, nuclear problems. I don't know. I'm not saying it was the right plan for the right time, but looking back, it goes, well, that could have actually maybe had some further agreements there. I'm not saying Ukraine should have to cede anything, but I'm saying if you wanted a plan that maybe, took in people's wants and needs at the time, and you're working with multiple parties here, that maybe was it. Now, what I'm saying is much like how Israel benefits from most proxy wars in Syria, they benefit the most, China benefits the most from wars and proxy that involve its larger competitors. So, of course, the US and Russia tied up massively. This goes back into what is said here, that Russia is tied up and losing power before. These are China's largest competitors. In my opinion, China benefits absolutely the most from reduced military power or political power from the United States and Russia. From the weakened ruble to de-dollarization. If you look at who would benefit from that, China, they just want raw goods coming in from Russia, and they want more global dominance for the yen, or for if BRICS were to create their own currency. So China has a lot to do here. China's unrestricted hybrid warfare is maybe not as obvious as maybe Russia's or maybe Turkey's at the moment in certain areas, but do not for a second think that it's not there and can't be very, very successful. But I want to take a step back and talk about those losses again. Now, Zelenskyy has made a long post on his Telegram, on his Twitter, and we're going to go through parts of this. Therefore, when we talk about effective peace with Russia, we must first and foremost talk about effective guarantees for peace. Ukrainians want peace more than anyone else. Russia brought the war to our land, and it is Russia that seeks to disrupt the possibility of peace. Now, updated data on Russian losses show over 750,000 casualties. Here we go, including 198,000 killed. So this is what he's saying. He's pushing back, I guess, on what the MOD say. They say liquidated. I take that as dead. That's what I take the claim. He's saying there's only, well, not only, I should never say that. That's an insane amount. But 198,000 have been killed, and a further 550,000 have been wounded. Our people are defending their homes at the cost of their lives and everyday life. For our soldiers and our civilians, it is precious to us. And this is the thing I've said, that this changes many predictions and calculations that people are making because people were taking the stated liquidated as assumed killed, therefore assuming over 2 million had been WIA. Since the start of the full-scale war, Ukraine has lost 43,000 soldiers killed in action on the battlefield. The Ukraine Losses website, which tracks then obituaries, they put since the 24th at over 60,000 and since the beginning 14 at over 65,000. Take that as you will. Sorry, I should go back to this is what I missed. Media Zone put the Russian figures at recorded names at 82,000, but the probate register showed difference in years prior to the years of casualties up to 120,000. So somewhere floating in that number as well. Okay. He says there has been 370,000 cases of medical assistance for the wounded. It also needs to be mentioned that our army, approximately half of the soldiers wounded in action, are later returning to the battlefield. So that data also includes light or repeat injury. So that data can be skewed that way. But he's saying half of the wounded are returning. We don't have evidence either way of this. One of the key distinctions between Russian army and Ukraine's defence forces is the level of frontline medicine, which is significantly higher in our forces. Now, one thing I will say is I don't see the ability to provide higher care being too dissimilar between the Ukrainian and the Russian forces, given the protracted attritional nature of the warfare. But I want to go over some sidebar points in that I want to make from what I see and my military experience with medical care as well. But frontline medics will not be the deciding factor, at least in higher care. They are there to stabilise, to move on to higher care. And this is the problem. Those medics, fantastic, great, stabilising, giving people that golden hour or time to move to higher care. One of the biggest problems is, though, that evacuation is impossible often until nighttime, if at all. That is the problem at the moment, is actually being able to move in and out. There is no medivac per se for Ukraine or Russia in this area, but I want to add a sidebar in a second to why I think that Russia may have a higher wounded to death than Ukraine may do, given the nature of offensive attritional war and offensive defensive. Give it a second, but as far as reaching higher care, I don't really see too much that would be dissimilar in this. Since September, Russia's been losing troops on the battlefield at a ratio of 5 or 6 to 1. Many say Russia lost over 40,000 just in November. Compared to us, they want to seize more land before global pressure on them becomes unbearable. This is what I've said, is Russia may be going, if Trump is going to end the war, let's go balls to wall, take as much as we can. And this is the main sense of confusion for many people, going, hang on, Ukraine is saying that they have a ratio of KIA on the front of 5 or 6 to 1 in Ukraine's favour. But Russia has the artillery advantage of sometimes 10 to 1, sometimes 15 to 1, sometimes 1 to 1. But they've always had, through the war, majority of the time, a massive artillery advantage. They've got the FAB advantage and other systems as well. While Ukraine at the moment and for months has been going through a critical manpower shortage. This is where people are going, this doesn't line up. Most people are killed or wounded by artillery, and you're still saying that the side with that advantage is suffering 6 times the casualties as well. Again, this is why if you put in BS into your calculations, you may end up at a point of which fits your confirmation bias more so than the reality. And I spoke yesterday on the Telegram, there's going to be some very, very hard truths following this war. But I want to talk about something I cop a lot of criticism for and what I see in this. So a gentleman on my Telegram said, what is your methodology? Because you claim that the Russian losses are higher. Words that affect, sorry, I couldn't make a screenshot with his thing in it. And I say, my methodology is that I say, I think it is likely Russia has more casualties due to being on the offensive for the majority of the war, and also have accepted that this is attritional war. Now, when I make this claim that I believe Russia has likely had higher losses than Ukraine, I am talking about the entire war, not day to day or not month to month. Remember, the entire war, the 34, 35 months it's been going on. And what I'll say is the reason these numbers get skewed, I believe, at this point in the war, is due to the failings of the Russian command to deploy an invasion force size instead of an occupation force. Way too few troops went into the country on those initial days. For an invasion, it was an occupation force that went in. It was just not enough. Another factor in this that is a failing of not only the Russian command, but a failing of other analysts looking on this war, the entire military community, Russia, NATO, everyone, played down and didn't realise the effectiveness of modern air defence, modern anti-tank guided munitions, or just anti-armour weapons and drones. And I believe that failure to see this gave things like the US predicting the 3 days and Russia deploying a much, much smaller force. And Russia, I believe unexpectedly, lost massive figures in early to mid-22 that still skew these figures today. For instance, it is rightful to assume in July 23, when Ukraine went on the counter-offensive, that Ukraine would have suffered higher losses than Russia, being on that offensive, being outside of defensive works. Offensive, defensive, you can make a fairly assumption that offensive is going to have higher losses. It's not true all the time, but most likely is. But we can't assume through the Ukrainian offensive that Russia was still a 6-1 at that point in time. So a lot of things are skewing figures here, but I believe if we look overall, it is likely who has been on the offensive the majority of the time, who is moving into some fortified positions, likely, it has been Russia, the majority of that, likely higher losses, especially due to those failures to analyse and command in the very beginning. Further, I do believe that Russia and Ukraine don't have a significant change in medicine or higher care. So between the two, as far as higher care, if they were to get to the hospital on a table, I don't see that there's going to be a huge change in this. I was a combat first aider with training in AMT, Advanced Medical Trauma, so that very front line and movement to higher care. So that can have a big change at the front. Of course it can. But once that moves off, who can get someone to higher care? So Ukraine may be in the positions to move, but Russia may have more freedom of movement further back inside of Russian borders too. So there are pros and cons both ways, but I believe as a statistic, I don't see that it's going to be too different. Although I say in this is why I said there are annexes to that, how you fight does change the outcome for your wounded in action becoming either surviving or killed in action members. Remember, for the majority of the war, Ukraine has been in defence. If you're in defence and a shell hits you, you are wounded. You are providing care or receiving care in cover from a known position with likely more and better first aid equipment. Evacuation is still a huge problem, but I say a known position with that equipment. Russia is on the offensive. If your vehicle is hit, you are getting provided or you're providing care from an unknown position or an unfortified position, likely in a very poor position, likely with limited resources. Evacuation is even harder again. So you can see where in this, as far as the care given by personnel, I don't think there's going to be a huge change. But as far as the ability to give that care, that's where I believe the change may be between offensive and defensive when we're looking at this war. I'm sure many people are blowing up the comments right now. It's great. I like discussion. I still believe Ukrainian Command, through Western Command, whose experience is in an air dominant zone, so let's say Afghanistan, in counterinsurgency warfare, that there is an assumption that they will at some point reintroduce manoeuvre warfare. So may not have the stomach, say, to want to have large losses, or those loss calculations are going to be far more conservative. Therefore, changes in calculus of acceptable losses in an attack. And in my opinion, in the age of drones, trenches, sensors, that manoeuvre warfare is dead unless you have a severely weakened enemy. That is my position on this, that the reintroduction of manoeuvre will only occur for a severely weakened other side. So we may see that in the future, but you're not going to outmanoeuvre drones, massive trench systems, and the ISR capability can provide to then artillery lines there further on. And I believe that this is still command wanting that to reintroduce, and I don't know if it's possible. Therefore, this goes into why I believe Russia has higher losses. I believe Russian command's acceptance of attritional war with higher losses are expected. I believe earlier on, I still don't think Ukraine's command, working with the Western commanders, have fully accepted attritional war due to decisions we see made around fortifications and mobilisation. That's my opinion. that I believe, due to this acceptance, Russia have a higher kilometre square to loss ratio, that they can see that this can be higher. And we see this in the recruiting, but we also know that Russia can accept this with how many they're recruiting and the much larger population than Ukraine's also. So they may not be able to accept that on Ukraine, so they may have to introduce manoeuvre. But one of the things I think Russia can get away with, because many people saying then the population will rebel, but this is my speculation, due to the brutality of the 20th century in Eastern Europe, especially in Russia, I do think that society will accept higher losses than what maybe the West, like Australia, would accept in a war like this. So you can't put those numbers onto that either. But I believe for these reasons, that's why I think Russia likely has higher losses, but I think there's been an acceptance of that attrition in this warfare as well. Further, we want to go over another thing that Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says. On the occupied territories of Ukraine, at least several million people remain. And this is the thing. Ukraine and Russia both have very poor demographics and have lost a lot of people in this war, both to migration out of the country and to KIA, on the battlefield. Now, it doesn't just mean killed, but if you're wounded, you're blinded, you've lost your legs, you've got a mental condition, you also are not going to return to the workforce. This all has a huge effect. Now, of course, with the several million people that remain in those occupied territories, that does help Russia, and it greatly does not help Ukraine if that border falls there. This is the reality of the war. We cannot simply end with a piece of paper and a few signatures. A ceasefire without guarantees can be reignited at any moment. As Putin has already done before, to ensure that Ukrainians no longer suffer losses, we must guarantee the reliability of peace and not turn a blind eye to occupation. What time is it? Oh my God, I need to go. Sorry. Ukraine, they need security guarantees, but I agree with this. But if the territory is not returned in a deal, it needs to be closely observed by NATO. And the concern about security guarantees could be that it is abused through false flag events. Maybe a false flag event used to draw NATO into Ukraine to return the territory, or vice versa, that Russia used some level of false flag to undermine Ukraine's security guarantees to maybe a push out of NATO. He says it can only be stopped by strength, the strength of world leaders, and become leaders of peace. We can count on America and the entire world to stop Putin. The only things that he fears are American and global unity. Russian military presence is also active in Africa, the sole purpose for destabilization. I've spoken about this. This first line here was further up in this. I wanted to add it here. Unity of the West is kryptonite to Chinese and Russian power. But their efforts to divide the West are dwarfed by our internal division through politics and ideology, if there's a difference, and on the international community by global actions in other areas of the globe. Now, he says it is precisely peace through strength that we discuss with our partners, as well as the steps and guarantees needed for people and a state attacked by Russia. War cannot be endless and must be permanent and reliable. Now, unless Ukraine is running the greatest information campaign ever, I don't understand the peace through strength argument without lowering the mobilisation age and having a clean house with poor command also. That there's ways Ukraine can move towards a peace through strength too, and those are the two factors which are not really being done, which I think more people should be asking for to have more success on the battlefield. Now, this has come out from a Trump advisor has said Zelensky's attire was disrespectful to the American people. He can't afford a suit. He wore a suit to the WEF, but can't wear one to address a joint session of Congress or to meet the president-elect of the US. And there has been a criticism of this before. And I believe, this might be nitpicky, but I believe that this is absolutely fair criticism. I understand it is to show solidarity with soldiers. Now, in my opinion, and my opinion of dealing with soldiers in every corner of the globe, from rebel forces in some areas through to conventional forces in other areas, soldiers are the same everywhere, and soldiers, in my opinion and my experience, find this shit cringe as fuck. But regardless, I get that for civilians of Ukraine and other areas, show solidarity with the guys on the front line. But in my opinion, when addressing the most powerful and rich government in the world that has ever existed, asking for billions of dollars, I do believe it is disrespectful. I do think that. I think it is taking the fucking piss, in my opinion. This is the reason I went from t-shirts to suits in these videos, is I realised the magnitude of what I am discussing from the safety of my office, seeing it from a long way away and speaking of that. I believe it is respecting, and that's why I have changed. And of course, when I roll into areas like this, I don't wear that because it doesn't make sense. But I actually think that is a very fair criticism. If you don't think that can't have an effect on how powerful people view that, you're incorrect. Will it change it? I don't know. Legends, have a great day. I am very late. Okay, bye-bye.